Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of the Kurokawa. I did that last time. That was the exact same mistake I made on episode 9, the KurosawaCast, where I can't say the name of the director that we talk about. My name is Rob, and I am, for all intents and purposes, the Kurosawa expert on this podcast. I'm joined as ever by Craig, who is the newbie to the films of Akira Kurosawa. Hello, Craig.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Craig. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Excellent. So basically, we have arrived at the granddaddy of them all, the Seven Samurai, which is not only considered widely to be Kurosawa's finest film, but is often placed fairly highly on the top 10 greatest films of all time. You see the Sight and Sound lists and, that kind of what have you in the world. A lot of the greatest filmmakers today list Seven Samurai quite highly on their lists. So it's one which has been very exciting to get to. Released in 1954, the first time in his filmography since he started as a director of features. I think that there's a gap between his films because there was quite a long production on this, which meant that he basically didn't release a film in 1953, which is not only uncommon for Kurosawa, but is quite uncommon for Japanese directors of the 50s. Like a lot of Kurosawa's contemporaries were churning out 3 or 4 films a year, like some of the other guys that were working at this time. So it was a massive undertaking, and actually the most expensive Japanese film ever made to this point. Took about 11 months to shoot, which at the time was scandalous, and apparently the industry was sort of abuzz with this kind of grand folly that was being done on location somewhere, costing Toho Studios a lot of money. So last time around, we ended up our Akiru podcast on what we always do, which is your expectations of what you thought Seven Samurai was going to be like. Obviously, with this one, you're coming in less blind because Seven Samurai has such a massive pop culture footprint that even though you haven't seen it, you've seen probably 3 or 4 remakes of Seven Samurai in your lifetime. So with that in mind, how did it hold up? I think an interesting way to frame it is you said that years ago you recorded it off the telly and you never watched it back then when you recorded it off the telly. It sat on your shelf. Are you glad you waited to watch it now, or do you think you missed out on a real formative gem earlier in your film viewing life?
I don't know if it would have been a formative gem, because when I think about my formative gems, they tend to be a bit more sort of idiosyncratic, strange little films, and I don't think this would have. I don't think it would have thrown me down a huge. I mean, I wouldn't have thrown me down a samurai rabbit hole. I don't think, but I don't feel like I've missed out. But I'm not gonna quantify that just yet. I'm gonna leave that hanging.
Okay, so basically, Seven Samurai, for those who somehow don't know, is. It's been remade as the Magnificent Seven. Loosely, Bug's Life is inspired by Seven Samurai. There are umpteen episodes of various TV series that are basically Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai, yeah, and also Seven Samurai was remade in the early 90s by Walter Hill, right? As the was it Last Man Standing, the Bruce Willis film? I think that's that's Yojimbo. I think that's Yojimbo. Yeah, but anyway, it's been remade umpteen times. It's been remade loads and loads of times in Japan and in the West, quote unquote. The rest, you can't move for Seven Samurai clones. But the basic gist of it is a group of farmers are going to be robbed by a bunch of bandits. The bandits are going to come and take their harvest in however many months. They're going to come back when the harvest is done and nick it all. Rape the women, kill the men, burn the village down, steal all the crops. The farmers basically go, well, what shall we do about it? Is it our lot in life? We just have to do this? Or can we do something about it? And lots of the farmers are of the opinion, no, it's too dangerous. We just have to give the bandits what they want. We can't fuck with the bandits. But the village elder agrees that they should fight back. And he says that years ago when he was a kid, the similar thing happened, and the only village that remained unscathed hired samurai. So he sends a couple of the villagers off to a local town, and they go to basically recruit a bunch of samurai. 7 of them, indeed. The number 7 is arrived at by the first one. They recruit Kanbei, who is Takashi Shimura, who becomes the de facto leader of the group. And he kind of works out they need about 7 based on the layout of the village and, what they're going to need to do. and then they go about recruiting them. And the film is
It's
very
it's this initial quote, isn't it?
It's his initial quote, and it's very funny actually as a quotes go, because the village elder says, they go, "Oh, is it all right? You sent us for 3 and we're getting 7." And the village elder goes, "Oh, well, I knew if I said 7, you'd..." Oh, no, he says he thought 10 would be good, but he knew if he said 10, they'd come back with 13. So he's surprised they've gone with 7. And Shimura also is kind of bullshitting with this quote, because in the end he thinks 6 is fine, doesn't he? And he kind of leaves with 6. So it's a very flexible number. But anyway, the film is very neatly, not to get too much into kind of the analysis of it during the synopsis, but it's very neatly divided into the first hour is basically recruiting the samurai. You meet the samurai, you get the samurai. That's almost exactly the first hour. Then the second hour of this 3.5 hour film, including the interval, is basically training. The samurai have arrived at the village, train up the villagers, prep the village for action. There's a little bit of action in the towards the latter end of that, but basically that second hour is the training, and then the third hour is just the battle, and the battle plays out, and it's really kind of delineated into these 3 thirds that I think conform quite strictly to those kind of, that's the structure of the whole thing. So we get the samurai, they're hired, they go to the village, they train everybody up, they have the big fight. Lots, I would say spoilers, but if you're listening to this, you've probably hopefully seen the movie or don't care about spoilers. Most of the samurai die, few of the villagers die, but they do save the village, and it's a kind of a Pyrrhic victory for the samurai. It's a bittersweet ending for the samurai, and that's basically the way the film goes in terms of the plot.
When you bring the plot down, when you boil the plot down, there's not much to it in those terms, and especially when you think about that against a almost 3.5 hour running time, but it is pretty full of the whole thing is fleshed out so well. I think that it's 3.5 hours. It's the quickest 3.5 hours I've ever seen on film.
Yeah, I agree. I was watching it for, I don't know if it was the 6th or the 7th time I've seen this film, and the only time I looked at the time was just to check if my thing about the thirds was correct. Like occasionally I just looked to be like, okay, so we're at the end of this bit of the film. How much film's gone by? But if I was just watching it, for fun, I wouldn't have looked at the clock at all. And I think there's been a few times I've watched it in that spirit where I'm sort of like, oh, I'll just stick it on for a bit, and maybe I'll watch the rest of it tomorrow or whatever. And it always grips me every time I've seen this film.
Yeah.
So
no. Sorry, go on.
What's your? No, I was going to say. So, what's your overall? Do you want to give an overall sort of opinion, or you want to go by blow from the start of the beginning of the film?
Well, I'm going to start at the beginning because, immediately, the background information about the 11 month and the budget and all that kind of stuff. Like, immediately, this film looks bigger, more expensive than anything else that I'd seen from Kurosawa before. The sort of the sets, the scale, the I don't know if they built that watermill in particular, but the way that's shot as well, and later on when it's burnt down as well is absolutely stunning. The film looks beautiful, right from the off. I've put in scale. I'm going to struggle for notes because I got caught up in the film about 20 minutes in and stopped making them. But
it's interesting to me, the opening credits, because even before you see the more lavish sets and the things you're sort of talking about, the film definitely does have that budget and that epicness to it. The opening credits are very atypical for Kurosawa and for other Japanese films of the era. That Japanese opening credits are usually very stately affair. I guess like classical Hollywood cinema, they're usually very kind of I don't know, nicely lit, nicely presented, kind of
bit of calligraphy.
A bit of calligraphy, bit of nice music. Like most of Naruse Orozu or even most of Mizoguchi's opening credits, they'll go over a nice still from, a nice still shot, or they'll go over like a bit of what looks to me like burlap sack, or that probably isn't, but like a nice bit of fabric that they're on or something like that. Whereas these ones are kind of rhythmically going to these quite intense drums, and then they start coming at kind of jaunty angles, don't they? Usually they're written very very neatly, very kind of straight lines. These ones are all kind of jagged and they're off center and they're off kilter. It's very, they're much more sort of, I guess, more of a confrontational opening credits than you normally get.
I hadn't noticed that in particular, but I had put right from the off that Shimura and Mifune get equal billing, like they're the first two names up. But when you're saying that, I noticed that as well. I think the scale, like straight in, like when you see just how many bandits and horses and like the vistas, the scale of it straight away is quite big. They're sort of galloping through the fields. It's really sort of high contrast, silhouetted shots of these bandits on horseback riding through down to this village, and it's quite like to go with the drums of the music of the opening titles kind of follows in for a little bit at the start of the film as well. You get a little bit of text. But immediately they're like this this ticking clock set straight away. Like they get there, they say, "Oh, we've already raided this village. Just wait and come back in a bit." And there's a villager with a bale of barley or something on his back, who's sort of hiding, and he overhears them. And immediately you've got this ticking clock. So this forward momentum, this drum beat, I think is one of the things that also kind of keeps the film just going. There's always like. Right from the off, like the fuse is lit, and we're going towards a confrontation one way or another.
Yeah, I bring this up even though it's much later in the film, but just because it fits here, is the device he uses later as well, which is very pleasing for me as someone who's very keen on lists and ticking things off in general. There's a device where as the general. Well, there is that as well. There's a bit where they say there's 3 guns, and then they count down sort of getting the guns. But there's also the grander one of having circles to represent the 40 bandits, and then Shimura at the end of each day crossing off how many bandits they've killed. And the characters are always keeping a running tally. Oh, I killed 4. Oh, there were 2 killed over there. They're keeping this tally. And in the Donald Ritchie book, The Films of Akira Kurosawa, that I've always kind of quoted on this, he actually brings an interesting parallel there and talks about how similar that is to the bullets in Stray Dog near the end, where you're kind of counting down how many bullets are left in the gun. And then also in One Wonderful Sunday, which I hadn't immediately thought of, they set up at the beginning how much money they have to spend. And then they go through having their day. And every time they buy a couple of cakes or whatever, you hear how much they cost and you kind of know how much money they've got left. So Kurosawa's quite keen on these... I don't know if those are all necessarily kind of ticking clocks, but these things of that the audience can kind of count along with and anticipate. Keep track of, and Seven Samurai in the the days till the bandits come, the number of bandits being crossed off, the number of guns the bandits have, has a few of these. Getting 7 samurai. There's a lot of things for the audience to sort of track in that way in Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I quite get that in portmanteau films as well. If you've got like a 2-hour portmanteau film with five films in it or something, then you know that. That each segment, if you like, is going to be roughly about 20 minutes long, and you sort of gauge how far through the film you are. It's a really good way of keeping that momentum going, I think. There's a few little bits and pieces. Like, I really liked. I've got some. I haven't. My notes are really poor because I like I say, I was really. There's a bit in quotes where I've just put, "I don't like it," which is, I think, is a line from one of the villagers that I found really amusing before they go off to... Do you know a bit I'm talking about?
I don't. Which one says they don't like it? They don't like what the bandits are coming.
Yeah, they don't. It's just a funny little quote. Anyway.
It was funny because of the understatement, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the thing that really drew me into the film, really, though, is because once you've got that set up out the way and they go off into town looking for bandits, looking for samurai, and there's this... They kind of... interview process of all the different samurai. Shimura's introduction is really great. Like, there's the scene where some criminal has kidnapped a child and it's hiding in a shack, and everybody's kind of circling around the shack but don't want to go in because they don't want the child to get hurt. Shimura kind of shaves his head, dresses as a monk, and goes along with a couple of rice balls. Sort of tricks his way into the house and kills the bandit. And everyone's kind of looking around in awe of this samurai who didn't ask for any payment, and that's the villagers immediately sort of latch on to that and go, all right, this is the guy who's going to help us out. But I put he just comes across as a total badass. like
He does. He does.
throughout the whole thing. And also I've put down here equals good egg. He also comes across as a good egg.
He does come across a good egg. That scene where he rescues the baby is brilliant because it encapsulates a lot of the themes of the film and also sets up very clearly why the villagers would want this guy in particular, not just because he shows he's a good egg, but because symbolically he allows his top knot to be cut off in order to pose as a priest.
Right.
And having your top knot cut off as a samurai is basically a humiliation and a degradation and almost means you're no longer a samurai, to the point where in the Kobayashi film Harakiri that got remade in I think 2011 by Takashi Miike, there's a scene, I think it's in both versions, where the hero chops off a bunch of his enemies' top knots just knowing that they'll be forced to kill themselves rather than have to kill them. So it's a big deal cutting off your top knot.
Right.
So the fact that this guy's willing to supplicate himself, cut off his top knot to lower his own status, to go and help people of a lower status in the kind of Japanese feudal hierarchy is one thing that's going to say to the villagers right away, well, this guy will help us, which I think really interesting coding on all of that.
I think the kind of the way that we've gone about this podcast and sort of going through the films has really added an extra sort of layer to that scene for me, because like I feel like I've seen Shimura do it all now. Like after playing the meek, mild-mannered kind of bureaucrat in Akira in the last episode, and then and seeing other things like the slightly schlubby detective in Stray Dogs, schlubby but kind of like world wise and kind of like he's completely believable in that kind of. I think it's the Yul Brynner role in the first remake, isn't it? And then the Denzel Washington role in the second remake. And obviously they're kind of, you know, all sort of coded slightly differently culturally, but he's really just sort of like, after watching him in Akira last week, for him going to be this kind of sort of slightly battle scarred, wise, but honorable sort of absolute leader as well, and kind of he sells the part so completely straight from the off, and it was incredible to see that, like after watching Akira. Toshiro Mifune is the one who's most associated, I guess, with Kurosawa. That's the image that I'd seen before this film, was him in the stolen samurai gear, sort of laughing maniacally, which I thought was a battle scene from Battle, but it isn't. It's from a different scene when I actually saw the film. I don't understand why it's the image of Mifune that is associated so heavily with this film, when it is Shimura's.
Yeah, I mean, Mifune gives great poster for this movie, because like if it's the bit you're talking about that's often on the cover, that's his really impactful, intense monologue in close up, isn't it? Where he's really animated. So he makes, like, I think you say this about Mifune in most of the Kurosawa films, he makes great screenshot in general, because he's always really doing something. Like he's like that face. Again, I don't want to jump ahead too much. When he's taken his mortal wound and he's edging towards the guy at the end, like he's so good at pulling that face there of this guy who's dying and looks menacing, and this kind of cornered rat kind of thing that he does. And then he's amazing in the bit where he's drunk and he's pulling crazy faces. So Mifune's very good for those sort of like screenshots and really memorable moments. But I agree that Shimura is kind of the glue that holds not only the film together, but within the film, he's the glue that holds the samurai together and the plan together. Like this is samurai. This is Kanbei's movie, isn't it? In a lot of ways.
And I think, Mifune is obviously also a very, very handsome man. My wife commented on that yesterday, even though he's been more handsome in other films that we've seen. I also found his performance in it. I found it very similar to his Rashomon performance in a lot of ways. Sort of the energy of it, the sort of the kinetic energy rather than the sort of rapey, murdery energy. But the kind of the size of the performance was very, very similar. I thought.
I agree.
But
there's one thing I want to mention from the start of the film, just before we move on too far, that because obviously people make a lot of hay about George Lucas being inspired by Kurosawa. Hidden Fortress is in a lot of ways the inspiration for the first Star Wars film, but it struck me as more than coincidental that this film begins with text saying that we're basically in a period of civil war, which is the opening text of the first Star Wars. And then to me, how similar the villagers turning up in town and looking at the samurai, how similar that feels to when Luke and Obi-Wan get to Mos Eisley for the first time. There's a real energy, hustle bustle, weird characters moving from left to right across the frame, looking around this hectic new place, trying to pick out who it's almost in a way even like going to Mos Eisley Cantina and trying to hire Han Solo, isn't it? That act.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out. It doesn't really say anything about Seven Samurai in of itself, but it's an interesting link to that larger Lucas inspiration thing that comes out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd listened to one of your previous podcasts 20 minutes in that you'd done with Tom, where you'd mentioned. I didn't remember the podcast very well, but I remembered you talking about seeing the recruitment of all the samurai in that first sort of section out in the town section. And before I sat down to watch it, I thought that's going to take a while. Because it's the sort of thing where in a Hollywood version, maybe 2, 3, 4 at a push would get some sort of actual plot time devoted to it. One of them would be bundled in with somebody else who actually, and a couple of them would maybe be a montage, But this, you do meet everybody, and everybody gets a moment. One of the other things I was really, and the thing that mostly kind of made me sort of trepidatious about this was I was expecting this film to be really po-faced. I was expecting it to be very kind of high tension drama, art, and it's not.
It's hilarious at points, isn't it? There's some comedy in it.
It's very funny. Everybody's very amiable, and the fella, there's what's the laughy happy fella?
Heihachi. Yeah, Heihachi's the samurai. The actor is Minoru Chiaku, I think, who's been in loads of them. He was the guy in The Idiot that you didn't much like. He's been in loads of the Kurosawa films.
He just sits in the background mostly with a big smile on his face, chucking in some funny comments, and he just kind of like brings some levity to the whole thing. But even sort of Kanbei Shimura's character, he isn't the po-faced leader. He's quite happy to have a little bit of a laugh and a joke and a chuckle when it's appropriate. The only character who's kind of the most, well, there is a kind of a stone-faced stone-faced character, but his kind of stoicism's kind of a joke in of it's not a joke, but it's kind of played lightly in of itself. But the only one who does kind of take everything really, really seriously is the kind of the young one, Katsushiro. That's his name, and his kind of po-facedness is kind of seen as being a bit too young and a bit too eager. They're all kind of a little bit. It's kind of like a bit of a rogues gallery, really, isn't it? It's that sort of like. I like
that you've got these 7 dudes, and they all have quite a clear gimmick because you've got this kind of the cool leader who Shimura plays. You've got the young guy who's the up and comer trying to learn from him, who's a bit overeager. You've got the tactical thinker who comes in. He's the one who, in his intro, he spots the ruse that they're basically. Kanbei has the young guy hide behind a door and hit the samurai recruits that he's trying to get to see how they'll react to it, if they can dodge it, or how they react to the situation.
Which they play out 3 different times with 3 different results, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And in the case of this tactical guy, he's the one who spots it a mile off and immediately ingratiates himself with Kanbei and ends up being the one who kind of walks around the village with Kanbei making plans. You get the old friend who's just a guy that Kanbei knows, who he bumps into, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to join? We're having a ruck," and they're the old mates. And spoiler warning, he's one of the survivors, isn't he? At the end, there's him and Shimura, and then you get the funny, crazy Joker man of Mifune, who is the wild card, loose cannon. He's funny, but not in the same way as Heihachi. He's not intentionally funny.
No,
they laugh at him.
He's not actually a samurai, is he? He's kind of.
He's not a samurai. He's a farmer's son, with a chip on his shoulder, who wants to kind of go up and move up the class system. There's Heihachi, who's the Joker, the comedy guy, and then there's also arguably the coolest character out of all of them, and there are some pretty cool characters in this film. But the guy you mentioned, the po-faced one, who's the master swordsman, who is introduced being just the biggest badass, and who gets at least 3 other just badass moments in the rest of this movie. So I think
it's very much like a cast from a Joss Whedon show, isn't it? It's like, if you gender swapped like 2 or 3 of the characters, then you'd have the cast of a Joss Whedon show, I think.
Yeah, I suppose so. Although that does sound like criticism, even though I know you don't mean it as such.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah. No,
but no, I know what you mean. In a modern context, they are kind of a wacky misfit gang where they've all got a kind of a certain spin to their certain. They've all got a gimmick, haven't they? Basically, there are in wrestling terms, they all have a gimmick.
It's a format that has been sort of laid out here, possibly used before. Although I'd be hard pressed to say where. But it is like this is the format for sort of gang stories. Moving forward, everyone's got a gimmick, everyone's slightly different, they're slightly mismatched, but yeah, it's really, really lovely, and just the warmth that kind of the relationships between them are sold very, very quickly as well. Like you kind of immediately start to feel that these people actually get on or like each other or kind of want to hang out in each other's company as well. I was really that whole section lasting an hour was something that I thought was going to be a bit of a slog, but it really isn't. I was quite happy for them to just stay in their sort of meeting, because it's not just the fact they meet each other; they meet people who don't join the gang as well. And you go,
they do, yeah, they do indeed.
You meet samurai who don't come along.
There's even drama with the peasants, with other peasants arguing. Without any samurai around, there's loads of stuff in that beginning, and I'd say it's all killer no filler for the most part. I would say that if I was being hypercritical, because the thing is, the film never bores me at any point. If I was being really ruthless and I was deciding there were bits I would cut out, for me personally, some of the stuff with the young guy is the stuff that gets cut out, because out of the 7, he is no one's favorite. Like, let's face it, he's the lame samurai.
Yeah, I know what you mean. He's the vanilla.
He's arguably also the heart of the film, isn't he? That's the thing, because it's also kind of his story in a way where you get this coming of age thing where he sees a man die for the first time. He kills a man for the first time.
Falls in love.
Loses virginity. Yeah, falls in love, loses virginity, sees war, loses friends. By the end of the film, he's kind of broken by it and scarred by it. But at the beginning, he's overeager. So he does have that full arc, and he's not a character. That's why I say that kind of, if I was pushed, because he clearly serves a purpose and he has an interesting arc. But there are scenes of him wandering around picking flowers and kind of looking at the girl in the woods that if you were really ruthless, you might trim.
Well, this is what I really liked about it. This is what I didn't make enough notes, and I feel like I'm not gonna. The whole point of this podcast was for me to give sort of my hot take on everything, but. It feels like I've only watched this the once yesterday, but I just felt like there was so much in it that was either I wasn't picking up straight away, and that repeat viewings would kind of help me pick out and kind of digest, because everything is so like because it's got such running time. Everything is so sort of deeply delved into, like the villagers themselves. So there's a whole hour when they're making preparations, and there's about a 20-minute section where they're just wandering around drawing maps, looking at places, going, well, this here, and we could probably can't do that. And then they go, well, we can't protect these houses, and there's some other villagers over here who aren't happy about that, and that kind of simmers away in the background. And then there's another character who cuts his daughter's hair because he doesn't want the samurai sort of fraternizing with his daughter. And like the villagers have their own issue. The villagers aren't just there like, oh, the samurai have come to save us. They've got their own kind of issues and their own sort of selfish kind of needs and like goals and stuff. And it's not an easy fix. That they don't come out to greet them. They're all kind of scared of them. Everybody's got different reasons for why they do or don't want the samurai here, and that's all explored and played out. And there's times when the villagers just kind of like, you kind of just want them to go and leave the villagers to themselves as well, like, because they don't they're not grateful. Some of them aren't grateful, or they're causing problems, or and all of those kind of, it's not really like a simple, right, the good guys are here to save the weak people. It's all plays out in a much more complicated way than that.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I would just say about the beginning, which I can relate probably to what you said about the bit where they're wandering around making maps. One of my favorite shots in all of Kurosawa is at the very opening of this film, where the bandits turn up on the hill. And I don't know how it's filmed. I don't know if it's visual trickery. I don't know if it's perspective. I don't know if it's just really cleverly positioning the camera. But there's a shot where all of the bandits are on the hill and you're looking seemingly level with all the bandits. And you can see all the bandits, but you can also see the entire village as if it's an aerial view, kind of up in the background, like on a flat vertical plane, almost like unfolding beyond them, almost like happens. I don't know if you've seen that animated film from last year, Wolf Walkers, but there's a visual motif in that where they will just in a very stylized way, they'll just have an entire town like settlement go up just vertically as the background in the distance, like it's kind of unfolding out, and it's almost like that in Seven Samurai with this. And I've never understood how that's possible. I can't imagine standing on that hill and being able to photograph that village so it's in that way. So I don't know if it's a trickery or something. But you get this sense of this village planned out. And it's one of the things that contributes to, in the first kind of 10 minutes or 5 minutes, however long they're in the village at the beginning, contributes to you very quickly getting a sense of the village as space. And I've talked about this in a few of the episodes of this. I talked about it with something as silly as a jacket on a chair in Akiru, but you talk about it with the sump in Drunken Angel, or, you know, any of these areas. Kurosawa is very good at establishing space. He's very good at establishing place and keeping that thing consistent. And in the first 5 to 10 minutes of Seven Samurai, you get a lay of this village. And then when they go and meet Kanbei and they tell him about the village, and he goes, well, hang on, are there hills behind your village? Oh, and is there a river? And is there this and that? And how many houses is it? Oh, we'll need 7 samurai. It seems like a credible fact based on the information that is consistent and available, right? Yeah. And then later, when he's walking around charting it, making a map, again, we get this confirmation. This is a very consistent space. This is what it takes to defend it. This is going to be the plan that we need.
Yeah,
and then the battle.
It refers back to it all the time, doesn't it? You've got that kind of wooded path that kind of comes down into the village where the bandits can sort of get lost in the brush, but then have to expose themselves when they get too close. The path leads down into sort of the center of the village, curves around into the center of the village, and people they're riding up and down this path, and there's space on the side for them to be able to close them off. But you understand that if you come back around this way, you're going back out towards the bridge. You always know where you are positioned within the village.
You do, and you also get from there, like exactly the bit where the spearmen can drop them off at what seems like the main entrance after the hills. But then you also know that round the back where the rice fields are is the bit where Mifune's manning the barricade that looks out on the flooded fields, that goes over to where the mill is that gets burned down. You get this very clear sense of the buildings. You get this very clear sense of the village. And I think, and I might be overstating this, maybe people won't all agree with this, but for me, this is one of the reasons why this film in particular, and lots of Kurosawa's films don't feel overlong and do feel completely involving because they're in such consistent space, because all of the things seem to have weight and consistent sort of place in their environment. You completely always buy into them, and you always understand where you are and how things are motivated and what needs to happen, and what's been done. It gives everything weight and purpose in a way which, not to rag on this film as it's always kind of the definition of this sort of thing, but just like, I don't know, in a Michael Bay Transformers, when you've got two Transformers smashing each other and you can barely tell from the designs which one's which anyway, and they're just in any random part of a city from one shot to the next, and you don't have that consistent space, that's when action becomes boring. That's when you lose your kind of your interest in it.
The thing is, I'm not sure if it's just to maintain good action, if you like. I think it's really integral to the story, because I was expecting when the sort of the markers passed, if you like, I did look up beforehand because I was planning on watching this in 2 parts, and I ended up watching it in one go, although I did skip the intermission. There's 5 minutes of music in the middle, and I just went from one end to the other end. I was planning on watching part 1 and then watching part 2 later. So I kind of like, we're about an hour in and we're moving it. So we're going to go and do the training, and then there'll be about an hour at the end for the battle. And I was expecting, looking back, it probably wasn't a reasonable expectation, actually, considering when it was made, because although it feels quite timeless to watch, the scale of things does change. But looking back, I was expecting a prolonged battle scene at the end, and it isn't that. Like the final scene isn't a battle so much as a siege. So it lasts for a couple of days, and you get the bit that happens at the mill and the bit that happens at the forest entrance, the bit that happens on the bridge. And it's like, right, we've set up these places and they can't get in here. And you kind of, much like we've got to recruit 7 of them, we've got to do this set piece here and this set piece here and this set piece. So the bandits are kind of like testing the defenses, if you like, and each battle happens in stages. So like, from a story level, to understand the progression of this battle, you need that geography. Like, you need to know where everything is, otherwise the story momentum, the plot momentum gets lost. Like, this is this bit first, and then they're going to try this bit, and then they're going to try this attack, with little lulls in between. Because I wasn't expecting a siege film at the end. I don't know why, because looking back, it's quite obvious. But I think, it's not just a way of staging good action, but actually it's fundamental to the story in this film as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it completely is. And I know what you mean about the siege. It doesn't really become a kind of open battle until the last 15, 20 minutes. And
it's not even that. It's only 5 minutes, actually, the last battle.
The bit where they're actually in the square, sort of running around.
When the bandit chief kind of comes in and kind of, that's only lasts for about 5 minutes. I did make a note also, that's when the weather gets the worst, and that's
the mud and the rain is so great.
And that's where you finally get your swamp. You finally get your mud swamp in the middle of the village. I was wondering how he was going to get the mud swamp into this one, because I hadn't seen it, but it's there.
It's interesting, the that stuff at the end with the rain and the mud swamp, according to Donald Ritchie, is the first stuff that Kurosawa shot on telephoto lenses. And apparently shooting stuff on telephoto lenses, not just in Japan but in general, was really rare in the early 50s. So it's sort of a pioneering bit of the film as well, technically, and it is amazing. Like, those shots of them in the lashing rain are just some of the best stuff I've ever seen in film. Like the bits where, I know this is a bit of a kind of a Kanbei circle jerk at this point, but the bits where he stands on a rock and he gets out his bow and arrow and starts taking dudes out, he just looks so cool. And Takashi Shimura is not a man where you look at him, you wouldn't watch him in Godzilla and say, like, that guy's so cool, but like, his character in Seven Samurai is so cool.
Yeah, I love the bit that Mifune gets as well, where he's kind of like, he's getting ready for that final battle, and he just kind of gets his different swords and plants them in the ground, like, right, these are my swords, and I'm just going to go through them one by one as they break. I think
I think it's things like this that I would have latched onto if I'd seen this as a kid. Like the Kurosawa is very good at establishing kind of, I think, quite iconic, lasting images. And some of the things I remember the most clearly from the first time I watched the film, I wasn't a child then, I was in my early 20s, but the first time I watched the film are things like him putting the swords in the mound at the end fight. They're things like him holding the banner on the roof over the graves. They're the bit where Mifune is mourning Heihachi, who he's gotten killed, basically. No, he hasn't gotten Heihachi killed. He gets Garobi killed, doesn't he? Or one of the guys he gets kind of killed with his crazy mission, and he's sitting there mourning by the graves. And the bit where he picks up the sake vase that Kanbei's given him, and he just downs it, just lifts the thing up, and he's just drinking it. And it's all falling all over him. Like bits like that really seared into my mind. Watch, from the film, the images he creates.
There's so many great little moments. I mean, it's not a flashy film technically. It's just really well deployed at certain places. Like there's a really good every frame of painting. You've probably seen it. It's the one about how Spielberg uses long takes, like invisibly. So you'll be looking at a wide, and then the camera will move, and all of a sudden you're in a close up or something like that. And it's not like when most people think of long takes, they think of they used to think of Goodfellas and things like that, whereas Spielberg uses them really economically, really, really well. And there's some really lovely little bits of work in here, like where what's his name? Is it Manzo, the villagers sort of he knows that his daughter's been with the samurai, and he's sort of chasing her through the house, and you're sort of seeing it through windows as the camera sort of pans from the outside. We're looking at the outside of the building, but looking into the building and following the action. That happens a few times, sort of watching from the outside in, and that kind of thing works really, really nicely. Some really lovely quick cuts, those kind of quick those quick running cuts that he also used in
No Regrets for Our Youth has one at the very beginning, doesn't it?
Yeah. In a kind of like it's a sequence where they're all kind of ready for battle, even though it's a false alarm, and it's just really, really kinetic, and I don't know, the speed. It's just really, really economical and well thought out, I think. But not to the point where you really draw attention. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It doesn't detract from the story at any point. It's all at the service of the story.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it certainly is. I think another thing I wanted to mention about the movie is that one of the key themes of it is around this idea. And I don't know whether the movie's successful really in this regard, and it'd be interesting to hear your take on it. But the movie sets up the idea that there is this complicated relationship. There are the peasants in the hierarchy who are below the samurai, and we should also kind of pity their lot in life. Like Kanbei certainly moved by their plight to kind of come and help them. And the samurai do, to some extent, look down on the peasants, where they're basically when Mifune's character finds loads of gear that the samurai realize immediately, hang on, they've taken that off dead or wounded samurai that they've possibly even murdered themselves, and they look very unkindly upon this gear, and the samurai start talking among themselves about well, actually, I'd quite like to kill these villagers now. I'm absolutely pissed off. Like they get the hump. And that's when Mifune gives that rant that we were talking about earlier to camera, where he's kind of in the poster shot in the gear. And he delivers this kind of soliloquy about how, yeah, you think this about peasants, but they're like this because of you. They're like this because of samurai, because you come and you do this and you do that. And, they have to live like this because of you. And that's why they're the sneakiest bastards, and they hide all the stuff and they steal everything because of you. And he kind of puts that all on the samurai. But if the film's trying to draw an equivalence between the samurai and the peasants and bring the samurai sort of down to that level or take them off their hierarchy, I'm not sure how successful that is, because the samurai ultimately, or at least Kanbei, and it is so noble that he kind of is they are the losers at the end, aren't they? They're the ones where, well, now these peasants don't care about us, and it's just us noble samurai that are still going to suffer and sacrifice with our code of Bushido. And I wonder whether Kurosawa, it's often talked about, sometimes apocryphally, it's not sure how true this is or how much of a lazy biography trope this is when talking about Kurosawa, about the idea that he was descended from samurai himself and was a member of the samurai class. It does seem in this film like to my opinion anyway, his own kind of his own sympathies lie with the samurai, wouldn't you say? And I wonder if that undermines in any way sort of the pleas to kind of make an equivalency with the peasants or to sympathize with the peasants. Because ultimately the peasants do come out of it as the ones who are hiding the sake under the floorboards. Yeah. They are a bit duplicitous. They are the ones who immediately sack the samurai off at the end. And the samurai are kind of the poor victims of the whole deal.
I mean, although you do get a lot of information about the peasants and kind of their lives. There's only a couple. There are only a couple really that get sort of much character development as individual characters. Like Manzo's one of the most prominent ones, and he's a dick basically. Yeah.
Rikichi's not a dick. Rikichi's the one whose wife got nicked.
Yeah.
Although he gets Heihachi killed, so Rikichi loses a lot of points with me for that one.
Yeah, but you know, there's an argument that Gizaku's kind of, you know, he's a wise, noble type he's old and he's kind of decrepit, but he's kind of you know, he knows where it's at. Like he's got a sort of a code of honor, and he realizes that these people can't do it themselves, and he reaches out for the help. But yeah, I think it's mainly because the samurai are just generally more rounded characters, and like I say, they're not po-faced. It's not. It wasn't what I was expecting from what little kind of samurai films I'd seen. To be honest, I think my only real experience of samurai films is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Turtles in Time. So I was basing a lot of what I was expecting to see on that, I think. Yeah, I like I say, because I know that, because I know that this became Magnificent Seven, and Yojimbo became Fistful of Dollars, and they sort of very highly influenced on sort of the Leone films and whatnot. Those sort of films, I like them, but they've never really related to them in any particularly strong way, especially, you know, those sort of Clint Eastwood style characters, and that sort of stoic po-facedness was, I thought that would be coming through as well, and it just wasn't there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, this isn't a Magnificent Seven podcast, but I watched the original Magnificent Seven last year for the first time. And what I was struck by in that is, even though I think it's a significantly shorter film, I don't have the running time for it in front of me, but it's not 3.5 hours long, Magnificent Seven. It really does feel overlong, and the battle scene towards the end, it just completely loses my interest. It does quite a good job in the early part with the establishing the samurai section, and actually finds a lot of ways to kind of transcreate the Japanese stuff into the American context of the Western, while retaining a lot of the associations and the meaning. And I can't think of them off the top of my head now, but I remember watching it thinking they'd done quite smartly some of the way they'd changed things to make it appropriate to Western, but retain a lot of that meaning. But the final battle sequence just lasts ages, and that's the thing about this film that really impresses me overall, which we've already talked about. But the pacing of it, and it just never drags, it never feels overlong. And I mean, we've both said before on this podcast, and you know, beforehand, just that 90 minutes, 85 if you could do it. Give me a 70. You know, a short movie is lovely, right? That's a great thing.
82 is my favorite.
82 is a good length. And I think you know, you said before about this that the reason when you were younger you didn't watch it and were kind of put off watching it to some extent was the length of the thing. I think even recently, before we decided to do this podcast, you kind of talked about thinking, oh, this is going to be homework watching this movie. I mean, I guess the key question, I think I know the answer for it already. I think you've answered it, but is it homework in the end?
No, not at all. No, this is this is one of the most entertaining films I've seen in a long time. Like it's just it's got a reputation for a reason, and it's just a really incredible piece of work. Like I will watch this again, no doubt, and probably several times I'll return to this because there's just so much that I feel like, you know, I don't feel like I've been particularly insightful on this podcast because it just feels like I was
Enjoying
not enjoying it, yeah, but kind of like there was so much more in it that I wasn't able to pick out on a single viewing. It just, you know, there must be there's so many little bits and pieces that sort of will pay off the more I watch it, I think, and especially not having any kind of real understanding of what samurai culture is or code or anything like that. I don't understand any of that. So stuff like the top knot kind of completely passes me by, and that kind of thing makes me want to dig into the film a little bit more. And maybe rewatch Bug's Life again as well.
The interesting things I picked up on this, my sort of 6th or 7th viewing of the film, was that I think the first times I'd watched it, I'd not noticed how much screen time some of the background samurai get, because you got your main samurai, you got your Kanbei, you got your Mifune character, you got the young one. They're probably the main 3 that get the most screen time. But and I kind of thought, well, Heihachi's very funny when he turns up splitting logs and he has a few one-liners, but he doesn't get to do a lot else. But then watching it this time, I was struck by how consistently he's shown developing a relationship with the Mifune character, how he kind of builds up a kinship with him, and he has a kind of a relationship with him where he takes the piss out of him, but they kind of get on quite well. And the fact that when Shimura asks the guys, like, okay, 3 of you are going to need to go to the bandit camp now. Who's going to go? Who are the volunteers? It's Heihachi's one of the first to stand up, and he doesn't make a song and dance about it. He just kind of gets up, nods, and walks off. And after Heihachi gets up, Mifune gets up and he follows him. And I kind of like that there's that little buddy duo that develops between them. In the same way you get the Master Swordsman character, he has this relationship where he kind of looks after and looks over the young one and is kind of aware of what he's doing, kind of keeps an eye on him. And the young one who pays so much reverence to him and tells him what an amazing bloke he is. And you get that sort of dynamic. You get the dynamic between the swordsman and Mifune when they both go out on the same mission and they have their 2 very different approaches to how to deal with it, where Mifune's like in a tree, really hyper agitated, really waiting for the guys to get there so he can fight them, and the swordsman's just lying under a tree looking at a flower, because he's so badass that you know that when the guys turn up, it's a matter of when and how he kills them, not if, you know, and he just dispatches them immediately while Mifune deals for ages with his one guy. When you get all these little bits of business.
I will say, actually, though, I know that they kind of, most of the samurai die at the end of it, and you kind of, there is a bit of tension as to who's going to live and all that kind of stuff. The only criticism that I would give in that final hour with the ticking clock device and all that kind of thing is, you, as the bandits kind of tick off, like there is this palpable sense that the threat is diminishing. So I didn't find that the finale at the end was quite as, it wasn't like, I didn't feel like the stakes had been raised up to the top, right up to the very, had been raised for the finale, because it felt like they'd been doing a good job at cut. Do you see what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. I think that's valid. I think there's a good sleight of hand that Kurosawa pulls with that, where he has characters talking about the final battle as if basically they're probably all going to die the next day. He has a couple of characters outright say, oh, so, you know, we're probably going to die tomorrow, right? Yeah, possibly, you know. I think the thing is that the previous battles are these little skirmishes at their defenses on the outside. And this is going to be when they actually go properly against the bandits. And the bandits as well, and this is something that's possibly sort of lost in translation, the bandits are also samurai. Like, they're just samurai who have decided to turn to banditry rather than trying to find a new, they're all Ronin basically. That this is set during the 16th century, which is like the warring states period, where basically loads of local clans and leaders were getting constantly overthrown, and when the local daimyo of one of these clans would get taken out, his samurai retainers, they would all suddenly be masterless samurai, which, you know, Ronin is what
Yeah.
is. So all these Ronin were just walking around looking for work, and they weren't allowed to do manual labor. They weren't allowed to, become artisans or farmers or any of that. They could only be samurai. So their options really were to kill themselves or to try and find a new lord. Those were the two options a samurai had. So the bandits are also samurai. They're samurai who've decided to forego Bushido, forego the codes. So when there's only 13 bandits left, that is 13 samurai against now 4 samurai and some guys with sticks. So I get what you're saying, but I also think that the Kanbei and the rest of them are aware that these other warriors are going to come into the camp now. They're on horseback. They're they're not with peasants. And also Kanbei, and I don't know how true this is. I would have thought defense is easier than attack, but Kanbei also says at the beginning that defense is much harder than attack. So he's kind of setting up the idea as well that they've got the harder job. I guess the they're looking to protect people, whereas the bandits can just do as whatever the hell they want. But no, I do take that. It's not something I felt, but I completely see where you're coming from with it.
Yeah.
So, all in all, you've mentioned that you'll rewatch this one. I mean, is that unique so far among the Kurosawa films? I know you've appreciated a few of them quite a lot.
No, I mean, I imagine I will rewatch Stray Dog. I can imagine rewatching Akiru. I'll probably rewatch Rashomon at some point. Although I've been less of I think Rashomon will be the one out. The ones I'm going to rewatch, Rashomon will be the one I've been least of a hurry to rewatch. I think. But I will rewatch Seven Samurai when I've got time. Yeah,
awesome. So I guess my favorite, as I've said from the off, like my favorite Kurosawa film is High and Low. So my high watermark is still there in 1963, waiting for us to get to it. For a lot of people, though, this is the pinnacle, and so I guess this is a decent time, as we'll get before the actual last episode, to ask sort of whether you think Kurosawa lives up to the hype. Whether you think that, obviously you've rated this film highly and there's a few others you've rated highly, whether in your view, I guess, you could argue all day about how important canons are, how biased canons are, how problematic they are. But like in terms of that canon, in terms of that 1950s canon of the kind of quote unquote great directors, like from what you've seen so far, do you think Kurosawa belongs in that sort of revered space?
Well, for me, I've seen. I mean, Akiru is kind of like the Akiru is the choice of Akiru seems to be the choice of people who've delved into it a little bit deeper, just so they can distinguish themselves from everyone who says how good Seven Samurai is, despite the fact Seven Samurai is clearly a more enjoyable, better film. I can see people having a more personal connection with Akiru, but it's not Seven Samurai. So based on this, based on Rashomon, and based on really, really good solid films like Straw Dogs, if he hits these heights again, even just once, then yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, he deserves his place in the canon for this, and Rashomon alone, I would imagine. But I'm aware that what's coming up is that the heavy hitters are mainly out of the way at this point.
And to some extent, we've got Yojimbo, we've got Hidden Fortress.
I know that there's like a late career flourish in Ran, the ones that I'm aware of coming up are Hidden Fortress for the Star Wars connection, Throne of Blood for the Macbeth connection, and Ran I was aware of, and I wouldn't have known of High and Low without you mentioning it, if I'm honest.
No, but that's something that I think is interesting to point out here, is that he made 30 movies and he's mainly famous in the West. And even though he got distribution for a lot of films in the West and kind of was quite widely seen in the 50s and 60s in kind of America and the UK and Europe, it was really only the jidaigeki films that were the ones that went abroad. That's the period films. Japanese cinema, for some reason, is divided into jidaigeki and endaigeki. Jidaigeki is period films, endaigeki is like contemporary films, and his jidaigeki films are the ones that are famous, and the endaigeki films are the ones that people generally didn't see at the time either.
Where does future set science fiction fall into that?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's another word for that one, but that doesn't tend to come up with the Japanese cinema I've seen so much of. But the kind of interesting thing from that is that he therefore has this reputation. And before I'd watched any, like before I knew anything about Kurosawa, I had the same association. I think you probably do, and a lot of other people do. Samurai movies. But the interesting thing is, he made 30 movies, and out of
we've
those,
only seen 2 so far, I think. We've seen 2.
Yeah, well, that's if you include Rashomon. Yeah, if you include Rashomon, then 2. If you include Tiger's Tale, just because it's kind of set in the past, then 3. But basically, they're
a smaller part.
They're a smaller part of his filmography. And actually, during this period, which is his kind of big period, he tends to alternate between the 2. So you have Rashomon, which is obviously the set in the olden days. You get The Idiot, which is more contemporary. You get Akira, that's more contemporary. But then you get Seven Samurai. Then you get I Live in Fear, which is more contemporary. Then after that, Throne of Blood, which is in the past. And it goes on and on. Lower Depths, the Bad Sleep World are kind of contemporary, but then you get the Yojimbo and all that. So he kind of alternates between the 2. And actually, out of 30 films, I can only count 8 of them in which there are people that have swords. There are only 8 Kurosawa out of 30 that have swords. The 22 others are not about samurai with swords at all. There are no samurai with swords in them. So it's very interesting that his career is seen so much in that way. I guess it's similar with Scorsese, right? Like Scorsese's filmography is not even 50% gangster movies, is it? But he made 3 or 4 very key gangster movies, and therefore it kind of overshadows a lot of what else he's done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he's I think it's probably, I would be surprised to see something else that is quite as impressive as Seven Samurai in the rest of the films that we watch. And I think it's just the size of this film, like the size of this achievement, that probably overshadows everything else. And then you add on to that, the Hidden Fortress Star Wars connection that's so ingrained in pop culture that just becomes an extra little bit of trivia, if you like, that helps cement it. But yeah, no, this is I can see why this film is in the canon for so many different reasons.
I've got a little bit of Partridge Kurosawa here at the end.
Oh, that's good, because do you want to do Partridge first, or did you want Zack Snyder to jump in here?
Give me a Zack Snyder. What's he got to say about the whole thing?
Well, because one of the things that I was thinking about when sitting down to watch this and how long it is and all that kind of stuff was I was thinking about putting the time across, and I'm on the fence really as to whether I'm going to watch this Justice League cut, which is 242 minutes. So
it's now being released as 6 episodes rather than a film, though, isn't it?
I thought it was gone back to a film now, just with chapters.
Oh, what? They keep changing their mind. Okay,
they keep going backwards and forwards. But yeah. Anyway, but it's longer. And there was a quote from him before the original film came out, where I did find it. And this is like I say, my research is limited to BFI Player or streaming sites and Wikipedia to keep the conceit of the podcast going. But there was a quote from him that said, Bruce Wayne is going to have to go and sort out the 7 Samurai, the Justice League, go out and sort of 7 Samurai, the Justice League together. So given that, and this new length running time that's going to be similar, I wondered how much of a direct remake, because I don't know if you remember, there was a load of crap about Unite the 7 as well in the
was there?
In the pre-release publicity materials. It was all about Unite the 7. So
are there even 7 characters in that film?
I don't think there is, but I think
maybe, Cyborg and Aquaman.
I think maybe Green Lantern was cut.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I think Zack Snyder thought that he was remaking the 7 Samurai.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm on the fence on whether or not I'm going to watch that one. I probably will because just like you, I have a sickness for wanting to log things on Letterboxd, and as long as it's there for me to log, and it's in the zeitgeist, then I might want to log it. The Another thing I want to mention just before I go into the Partridge quote, actually, is I'd forgotten to mention Fumio Hayasaka, and I need to mention Fumio Hayasaka now. Fumio Hayasaka is the composer of Seven Samurai. He was the composer on most of Kurosawa's films up to this point, and fairly shortly after Seven Samurai, he died of tuberculosis. So he's no longer composer going forward near the others. I would say the music on Seven Samurai is the best in any Kurosawa film. It's certainly out of the ones we've seen up to this date, the only one with like a really memorable score. Like sometimes the main theme of Seven Samurai is just something I start humming around the house, like it's really catchy. And there are several other little motifs that come through the film, like the one when the villagers are kind of looking around the town trying to find the samurai. There's a really memorable refrain there, and there's a couple of other little bits that get repeated as themes for certain characters as well. And they're all really memorable. They're all really good. And there's also kind of a funereal quality to some of it, which some critics have put to the fact that the guy knew he was dying of cancer when he made it. There's certainly kind of a lot of regret to a lot of the music in the film. I think you feel kind of a lot of sadness in the music, which comes across as this kind of idea that the samurai are kind of on this, I suppose, foolish damned quest for nothing, not going to get anything out of it, and it's kind of quite a mournful tune they get in the film. And I think I just wanted to mention him because he's a big deal in Kurosawa films. Up to this point, he's a massive collaborator with Kurosawa. They were very close friends, and this is his final collaboration with him. So I wanted to mention that. Right, on the slightly happier news, I do like to, as regular listeners will know, when I was reading Kurosawa's autobiography, which we've run out of now because it doesn't cover the films after Rashomon, there were some fantastic quotes of him sounding like a very bitter 1950s Japanese Alan Partridge. And luckily, happily, there continues to be quotes from him about his films in the Donald Ritchie book, because Donald Ritchie was aware of quotes in interviews and stuff in Japan at the time. So there's a bit here where he's complaining about how he was being attacked in the press at the time in Japan for the film running over budget. And apparently there was a narrative at the time in Japan that was basically, yeah, Kurosawa's the guy who can't stick to budget. He's making another very long, very expensive film somewhere. What a folly. So he has this to say. He says about when he was told you're spending too much, he launched an attack. You try to give a film a little pictorial scope, and the journalists jump on you for spending too much money. This is what I really hate about them. They're only an extended form of advertising. They talk big and make pictures sound important to make themselves seem more important. The more they try, the greater they lie. In this instance, one of my aims, as it is with every director, is to stay inside the budget, but something always happens and I go over it. How the journalists pounce on me and say that I'm squandering precious resources, and yet how right now Olivier and I are both making Macbeth. This is a reference to when he was making Throne of Blood and Olivier was making a Macbeth movie. And I bet I could finance my whole film for just the cost of one of his larger scenes. Japanese films are made too cheaply. So yeah, he had a little bit of a rant on about journalists there. There's an ongoing thread through some of the... Apologies, that's terrible audio kerfuffle. There's an ongoing thread through lots of Kurosawa's biography, and also in the scattered quotes elsewhere of him being kind of a paranoid and being kind of always feeling like he's being attacked, and just lashing out against his so-called kind of accusers. And you get that when the quotes that were attributed to him when we talk about, for example, Scandal and things like that. There's always this sense of a chip on his shoulder that he's kind of excising through his films. So yeah, that was the most Partridge-y of the Seven Samurai quotes. He hates journalists. So yeah, that's Seven Samurai. Oh, your dinner's just arrived. That's perfect timing. So any final thoughts on Seven Samurai before we rank it?
I don't think so. Like I say, it's just something I feel like I need to watch again at some point to dig into, because I feel like you could rewatch this endlessly, still find things in it.
I agree.
Top right
top right corner. So easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
this graph is not fit for purpose, is it? So there we go. Top right corner. It's currently top of enjoyment and appreciation. And then just finally, we've got I Live in Fear next. So we are returning by virtue of the fact that it is a jidaigeki contemporary set movie. We are returning to less famous waters here. So what is your anticipation of what this film's going to be? I imagine you've never heard of this film.
Never heard of this film. So, according to the BFI player, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki triggered numerous responses within post-war Japanese cinema. So, this is 1955. This is a year after Godzilla. So, I'm not expecting it to be quite as fun as Godzilla, but a few as original as Akira Kurosawa's nagging account of a wealthy foundry owner who, terrified at the prospect of nuclear holocaust, strives to persuade his reluctant family to move to Brazil. The mood of nuclear paranoia has rarely been so powerfully caught as in this eerily reiterative portrait of obsession. I don't know. I don't know what to expect from that. I'm kind of hoping for a little quiet gem. I will take few as original as Akira Kurosawa's nagging. I'll take that. I would argue Godzilla was. And I suppose there were giant monsters films before that. But anyway, that seems like a more original take on the subject.
Nuclear subject.
Anyway,
yeah.
I'm hoping for a little quiet gem. Like, I remember, I don't think it was their first film after No Country, but I remember Coen Brothers having all that huge success with No Country, and then A Serious Man sort of quietly slipping out to the point where I went to go and watch it at the cinema we both worked at on a Saturday afternoon, not even realizing it was a Coen Brothers film. And I was sat in my chair,
right.
and it said directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. I was like, oh, excellent. So I'm hoping for a quiet little gem, possibly a little bit of a kind of a character study, hopefully with like a little bit of a kind of somebody falling apart kind of thing, but I really wouldn't know what to expect from this at all, to be honest.
Do you know anything about Mifune's character? Have you seen a picture of it?
I can see a picture, and it looks like Mifune is aged up for a role.
Yep, he plays a very old man. And I love me some Mifune, as I think you're coming to as well. But he's never subtle, so this will be fun.
So this feels like it's a film. Without even looking at this, I imagine it's a role that Shimura should have had.
Yeah, you think? I will. I don't want to preface it too much, but I would say it would probably be better if it was a Shimura role. But let's see. I don't want to put too much on it. It's not one of the most well beloved Kurosawas, but it's certainly an interesting one. We'll I'm looking forward to covering it. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I think I've possibly only seen this one the once, so I'm very interested to reevaluate it in the light of the pod. So until that day, we'll get to that hopefully for next weekend. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Craig, as always, for joining this pod, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.